this is a great conversation as we talk about how important it is to create these relationships and, and the partnerships that we have. And Jim, I know I'm primarily from the Parks and Recreation realm. And so having been a practitioner and now a consultant and a researcher for a long time, I know how challenging sometimes it can be for our Parks and Recreation agencies. And I would like both you and Anastasia, as we get to Anastasia, to talk a little bit about not only the benefits of partnerships, but then also talk a little bit about, some of the challenges that you encountered, and then also, some of the pros and cons, I guess, where I would go. So Jim, if you don't mind kind of coming at it from the standpoint of the director for Parks and Recreation in Lorain County, tell us about this relationship with the library and how it works for you.
Especially with the Lorain Public Library System, our Metro Parks and the staff have been working with the library system throughout all the library systems in Lorain. About, from a simple storybook trails along a lot of our trails, very specifically with Lorain Public Library at this Lakeview Beach, which I know we're going to be focusing on here. Our staff there had formed relationships years ago about getting families and children to the beach, to the parks for story time, for different reading, different activities. So again, it is just that very specifically, and I know Anastasia, several years ago, we were actually neighbors, if you will, on a streetscape project. It was one of these pop-up things, and it was fun to be together because we were talking about getting people in parks, getting people on alternate transportations, meaning they're going to walk or bike, and there was a lot of, I think, marriage of those ideas, and we've continued to push as hard as we can on these collaborations. And make it successful because we serve the same people in many ways, and if we can work together to basically compound that benefit, we're absolutely going to do that.
Okay, great. So what are the challenges that you've seen, Jim?
I think there's some people who will question it from a purist point of view, and I'm sure Anastasia has experienced some of the same things. Like, well, what do you work with the library for? You're a parks person. You're a parks organization. What's going on here? And I think it's just that I guess in sort of in some ways a parochial point of view, people don't see that collaboration. They don't see the benefits, those compounding of benefits. Where we work together, we get the greater good. The sum of the parts are, are greater. So I think that's some of the challenges, but really beyond that, I think it's been minimal. Sometimes it's a little bit of a logistical, getting staff to talk to staff about do this, do that. At certain points in time, there might be sometimes a disconnect because our boards are different, our logistics may be a little different, but frankly, that's minimal stuff. That's easily overcome. It just takes time,
So Anastasia, same question for you. What are the benefits and the challenges that you found in this relationship with working with Jim and his crew at Parks and Recreation?
Well, I mean, as Jim mentioned, when I first got here about 4 years ago, I actually met with Jen Bracken from the parks, and we were talking about active transportation. It was something that was really important to the health department, to the parks, and then we just had a great conversation trying to figure out how we could support that in the community. So it's just evolved over time to something that is actually now physically sitting on the beach. So to me, it's like a good example of how you start small and have these conversations. And like Jim's saying, our boards ask questions like, well, what exactly does that mean? And we're investing these resources, but is it going to be on our property? No, it's going to be somewhere else. And that's sort of the point. So I think that, but again, those were super, super minimal. And I've just seen from everyone on both sides, the passion for doing this project. Anyone that I've talked to from the Metro Parks and on our side too, is just finding ways to make it happen. So I think there were all kinds of things with COVID and everything happening, and we didn't know what would happen, but it was important to everyone to actually open this year. And I think we were successful in doing that. So I'm really thrilled with our relationship. It's been really good, Jim.
Thank you, Anastasia.
Noah, I'll get to you in just a few minutes, but I just wanted to ask a little bit more detail about Lorain County. So what you talk about the project or the projects, what are some of the key projects or initiatives or programs that you have offered that either one of you, Jim or Anastasia, can tell us just some of the exciting, fun things that you've done together?
I'm really excited about the Go Lorain bike share. So that was the outgrowth of that active transportation conversation a few years ago. So it was just trying to figure out how people could use the library to check out bikes, and not in a recreation as part of it, but in Lorain, where we were focused, it was really about transportation. How do we encourage people to be more active? So I think for us, just seeing that overlap has been really great.
Yeah, I mean, to build upon that, what Anastasia said, and it is again about getting people, especially, it's sort of funny how the COVID thing kind of entered into the picture for this calendar year and probably into the next. But it's another way to kind of, like I said, turn back and look in the mirror and say, whoa, wait a minute, this is really what we should have been pushing all along, and what a happy accident in so many different ways. Getting people outside, getting people to walk, and again, take that active transportation. It's building on their health. It's getting people to places where we want them to be relative to, activity, whether it's, again, to a library, to a park, to be part of that. And I think these collaborations, which you touched on a little earlier, Teresa, about again, where our worlds in this specific case came together between Anastasia and our world was a conduit through the health district, in which we both have very strong relationships with. And if you look at that, if you kind of look at that picture, you see these are three larger organizations that look beyond. We serve just more than just one little tiny little community. Okay, we're serving a greater group of people. I mean, Anastasia's organization, Lorain Public Library, just isn't in the city of Lorain. Okay, they're in multiple locations, which is great, and we serve the entire county, as does the health district. So I think there's a certain, again, building that compounding of talents and reach. I think serves a greater good, and we get so many more benefits from that.
That's wonderful. Yeah, no, I want to turn to you a little bit to talk about this. I know a lot of your work which is kind of interesting. A lot of us don't, or I do, but a lot of other folks don't necessarily associate libraries and or public parks and recreation with preventive health. And a lot of our work has been in making, we are part of preventive public health. Can you talk about, Noah, your research and what you've done around, I know you've started a lot of active library programs. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got involved with making that intersection between public health and libraries, and now how you're moving and facilitating that with Parks and Recreation?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and it's definitely been a circuitous journey. So I'll try to keep this brief and focus on the highlights. And I would say at this point, what I've been really focusing on is how and with what effects libraries get involved in kind of multi-sector coalitions around health. And so I was really excited when I heard Jim and Anastasia talk about the involvement in the health district was kind of a conduit to a lot of these partnerships. And that's really what I'm seeing in a lot of places, is that it's not always a one-to-one partnership. It's more of a diffuse kind of coalition. You may have the health department, Parks and Recreation, public libraries, and other entities, YMCA. I mean, you may have partnerships for children. The list goes on and on, but it's really, I think it is about libraries in particular, really being proactive in terms of going out, getting involved in these types of coalitions, these committees, really showing up to community events, showing up to health fairs, showing up. I liked how Anastasia mentioned that a lot of these relationships started. I think you mentioned you were at a streetscape event with Jim a few years ago, and that kind of kicked off the conversation. And that's really what I focus on in my research, is really understanding kind of how those relationships begin, and then where do they go. And I think it is, so I'll leave it at that for now, but I think we're definitely getting involved in these conversations. And I think the more that we get involved in libraries, the more kind of healthy our communities will be for everyone. Yeah.
Great, great. So the next question I have for all three of you, so maybe you can kind of quickly think through, a lot of times we see the challenges in terms of relationships between Parks and Recreation and libraries and public health is the kind of a territorial nature. Everybody's got separate budgets, right? And I know you're all responsible for your budget, your facilities, making sure that, we get into issues of cost recovery and staffing and maintenance and all of those little nitty gritty things that actually take real money. How do you minimize that kind of nature of, well, this is going to have to come out of my budget versus your budget? And how do you have those conversations and kind of make sure you're, number one, not duplicating what you offer? Because I know sometimes if you're offering programs, Parks and Recreation will say, well, I have programmers that do that. And the libraries are like, well, I have a staff person. How do you minimize the duplication and also minimize these issues around budget and territorialism?
I hate to make it seem like it's, kumbaya or whatever up here in Lorain County, but I just have noticed that there's a fertile ground for those kind of collaborations already here. So that's just been my experience. But as far as the territorialism and all of that, with this little library on the lake project specifically, the health department actually gave us a little bit of money to fund the equipment that was going in there. And we also applied for an LSTA open grant from the State Library of Ohio to also fund that. So when I was talking with my board, it was very reassuring to them to understand all of the equipment and all of that was already going to be paid for. And then when we talked about our relationship with the Metro Parks, and a lot of that logistics has already been worked out. So I think for us, it was just a matter of trying to talk to the board and the community and our staff and everyone that this is really a shared cost. It's not like in the middle of a pandemic, we're just going out and assuming all of that risk ourselves. It was important to everyone to know that lots of people in the community wanted this and we're sharing in the cost, whether that's monetary or sweat equity.
Great, great. And how about for you, Jim? I know obviously you're given staff time and facilities and things like that. How do you approach that when?
Well, I mean, again, building again on what Anastasia said, it is that, we frame things as somewhat as an investment. Okay, so we're going to be investing in the community, we're investing in the people, we're investing in the people in those communities that invest in us, that trust us, that we have the privilege to serve them. So, when I guess kind of hit the rewind button a little bit about, getting things started. I think it's very open. It's very open as to, okay, here's an idea and here's how we think we can come together and get this funded. Okay. There is no hidden agenda. I think very specifically with the library, Anastasia, myself, and our staffs, I was very open. I think we have, as I talk about that privilege of trust, I think we have, both organizations and the health district, have a high level of trust within our community. And that goes a long way. And our boards trust us when we bring something forward. These aren't really personal agendas, okay? We're pushing an agenda because we firmly believe in it, but I think we have the trust and the confidence of the people that we serve. And again, Anastasia talked about, building on some different grants and some other funding sources. We also have the same. When we apply for a grant, we have a high level of success. Yeah, we don't get every nickel and dime, but I think again we're trusted to get that grant and to spend the money on what we said it's going to be. And again, we're always investing in the people. We're always investing in our community, and I think we have established a high level of trust, and we work hard, on a daily basis to maintain that trust.
So as we do facilitation of partnerships for various different agencies, agencies, for-profits, nonprofits, other governmental, one of the first things that we always talk about is, number one, building that culture of trust. I think you've nailed that. The idea that you have to come at this with an openness, and it's who we serve, which the taxpayers, they don't know. All they know is they're all paying taxes to all of you, right? And so, but sometimes we talk about kind of creating a prenup agreement. talking through, here's all the best case scenarios and the worst case scenarios, which are hard conversations to have when you're really passionate and energetic and wanting to get something done. And I guess, Noah, I want to turn to you. I know you've done a lot of work on this, talking about like, if we could recommend, what are the top things that an agency needs to consider, either from either side, from the library side or the Parks and Recreation side, in terms of getting these partnerships going? You mind talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And really the thing that comes to my mind immediately is a long-standing partnership, not with Parks and Recreation, but actually with the museum. So in the city of Chicago, Chicago Public Library has worked annually with the Museum of Science and Industry on a program that was initially called Nature Connect. I think it's now called Science Connect, since the mid-1980s. And so what's really enabled this 35-year partnership to flourish is that they have incorporated into it an annually revised memorandum of understanding. So they every year they revisit it. Here's what the library's role is. Here's what the museum's role is. Kind of who's responsible. Have there been staff changes? And that kind of like annual return to the memorandum of understanding, which also facilitates an assessment of how the partnership has gone, has really enabled this long-standing partnership between the museum and the library, really focused on engaging kids in STEM education during the summer months, has been phenomenal. And so I would definitely, I do think those documents are really important, and they can be really helpful. Oftentimes these things begin with kind of personal relationships, but one of the problems with kind of partnerships based so heavily on personal relationships is if you have staff change, then it can really fall apart. And I've actually seen that. I won't mention any names, but in one of the communities that I've studied, the director of the Parks and Recreation agency left, and in that staff vacuum, the kind of partnership between the library and the parks kind of fell apart because it was so heavily dependent on that one particular relationship. So I think kind of those documents can be super helpful in kind of year-to-year sustainability of these relationships. So that's definitely one thing that I would recommend considering.
Great. So yeah, I agree with you. In our work, we almost always suggest a written formal partnership agreement that kind of outlines, here's what we're going to do, here's what you're going to do. Jim and Anastasia, not to put you on the spot, but do you have a written agreement around your relationship?
Yep, passed by my board. So yes.
Wonderful. That's so great. Yeah, and then how often do you review that agreement in terms of what you're going to do? Is it annually or?
That's what we're planning to do. So
yeah,
we just signed it. So.
Right.
Well, I want to thank you for spending time with me today and talking about these important topics. Is there anything else that you would like to make sure that we share with your colleagues, on whether it's in parks or libraries or Noah, with the academic realm and the people who are doing research around this?
I mean, on several levels, it's somewhat like one of those like V8 moments where you go, well, yeah, of course, why wouldn't we do this? Because of who we are, what we do, who we serve. I know from a historical and I think we're all students of history, but parks and libraries and learning, there's so many, like I said, overlap and compatibilities. And when you think about our worlds, it makes sense to say we are very neutral. I mean, why do so many people go to the libraries to have their meetings, their committee meetings, or whatever that activity is? Why do people do it in parks? And we referenced our relationship with the health district, and we've encouraged a number of our healthcare providers here in this part of the state to use our parks, and of course use the libraries. And there's no real agenda other than come to the parks and learn quality of life. That's what we're about.